This is our most profitable segment. On the right, I'll cover these one time, and then you'll see them in the other slides. This is experiential data that came in from this group. What was their cut? This isn't the only metrics we collect in our experiential data, but LTR is likelihood to recommend on a 0 to 10 scale. This group averaged 9.2. LTC is likelihood to continue membership. I'll tell you that that correlates far more tightly to cancellation than likely to recommend does. Overall staff friendliness, 9.3. Front desk staff friendliness, which we know is critical for our clubs, by the way. I'm talking about our two particular clubs. EC is equipment condition, GC is gym cleanliness. Suffice it to say that these are really high customer experience scores. About half of our members are in this category. Okay, so when we say that it needs nuance, we'll take a look at the next slide. Segment B, our second most profitable. Now you know how to read this slide, but there's still 901 members in our second most profitable group. But I want you to notice something here. 15.83% have canceled. So they canceled about twice the rate as our most profitable group. Look at average visits per week, 2.7. They use the club twice as much. So if you're only looking at the number of visits as the level of engagement, that's not the only thing we should be looking at. On the customer experience scores, I'll just summarize it this way. They're pretty darn close to the same as Group A. Both of them are having a great experience. Now let's look at something a bit more horrendous here. This should make you cringe or throw up or something here. So another big group, right? 648 members. For God's sakes, they all cancel, right? 98% of this group is canceled. And you might have noticed in that previous slide, median age was 34 compared to 52 in our Group A. This one is still median age 33. Half of them are female, more than half are female. Average visits per week, 0.03. This is some failure. I'll just say some failure on our part as operators, meaning me and our clubs as operators. Much lower enrollment, much lower dues. But I want you to notice over here, likelihood to recommend is very low. Likelihood to continue is low. Front desk staff friendliness scores are low. So we failed somewhere here. And we might have failed in how we acquire that customer. So I just want to use that as the setup as Keith then is going to take you into even some more nuanced data. So I met Keith a couple of years ago when Keith was selecting a partner for some clubs he was working with. And in that last few years, he and I have grown to be pretty good friends and really like working together. So I'm excited to introduce to you Keith Catanzano.
Thanks, Blair, and thank you to everybody who is on our webinar today for taking a little bit of time out of your day to chat with us a little bit about how we have, for a number of clubs, including Blair's two that he just referenced, how we have used different analytical techniques and the concept of big data specifically for the fitness industry and specifically in what we'll talk about today around retention. As a little bit of background, picture there is me up at the front of a classroom sort of waving my hands wildly while a group of students feign interest. I work for a consulting firm here in Washington, D.C., the other Washington, the other side of the country from where Blair sits right now. And it's a firm that I co-founded a few years ago after working for probably about 15 years in the use of big data and analytics for really big companies. We co-founded Two River Consulting Group to specifically identify ways to bring those same techniques to smaller enterprises, mid-market enterprises, and quite frankly, I've had a lot of fun with it because there's just some great interesting problems to work on and just great people passionate about their business and passionate about what they do. And so we've been really fortunate to work with a lot of club owners and operators over the last several years. We've probably worked with somewhere north of 100 clubs to date, to include high-end sort of experiential clubs and high-volume, low-price clubs and family fitness centers and sort of the whole range there. And what I'd like to do today is just walk through, maybe over the next handful of minutes, some of the observations that we have had in hopes that it A, sparks a bit of a conversation, and B, helps you in what you do. So this particular discussion is something that we call stop running in place. In other words, how can a focus on your data and your members help to shift the recruiting and the great sales activities that you're doing away from simply replacing lost members, which is expensive, and you don't grow, and ultimately you're in some ways running in place. And so to do that, what I'd like to do is kind of walk through what we perceive to be some of the challenges, some of the ways that you can identify who are the right members and what's the right time and what's the right message to engage with them, and then what are some of the ways that have been successful to overcome these challenges. So to start out, you've got a lot of data. I mean, everybody on this call, you're sitting in your club, and you've probably got some form of a member management system running on a computer near you. And I know some of you have probably got different other support systems that are helping you with prospecting or scheduling and customer relationship management. And I suspect a lot of you are using Medallia or perhaps some other techniques for surveying your members to try to understand their view on their experience. So A, you've got a lot of data, but B, it also can be hard to make sense out of. And so what we've really thought about is how do you go from having so much information that it's kind of hard to get your arms around all of it to a point where you're truly getting lift from that data. You're really capitalizing it on a way that creates a unique advantage for you as a business, and just a terrific experience for your members. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Yep.
Can I make just one quick comment about that, because that was one thing you really impressed upon me is that we all in the nature of our industry is that we have a tremendous, right? I mean, it's a membership business, so somebody's got to check in. We know the time they check in. Good Lord, many times we know if they're connected to other family members in the club. A lot of us track, like if you buy a bottle of water for cash in our club, we put in your membership number. We know where you live. We know that if you're purchasing services. And one of the things I remember in a lot of our discussions was that in more transactional business, in less relationship-oriented, that we seem a little bit more like a B2B model. And in some more transaction-oriented businesses, they've had to build entire loyalty programs for two things. One, yes, it's great to get points and try to maintain some loyalty through some incentives. But two, that's how they go get information, right? I mean, and we actually have it just by the nature of our business, right? I mean, isn't that a big part of why this is such fertile ground for this type of big data practices?
Well, you're absolutely right, Blair. I mean, for anyone who stopped for a cup of coffee on your way into work this morning, or went into a shop to buy something, that shopkeeper or that coffee shop that you stopped at, if they've got a loyalty program, then just Blair, as you mentioned, it is a good way to provide some rewards back to their customers, but B, it's a way for them to know who's buying what and when they're buying. And so they either had to create that program or they had to buy it to get the same kind of insight that you have almost by sort of default with the nature of your industry. And so, yeah, I mean, look, there are industries that would kill to have the kind of data that you have in the kind of insights around your customers, in this case, your members, what they like and when they use your products and services. And other companies and industries have to design and create, elaborate programs to have that sort of information at their fingertips. And you've got it. And so, what's really interesting is then how do you maximize the advantage that you can create with it?
Great.
That's a great point, Blair. I appreciate you bringing that up. So, what are some of the other challenges? Obviously, having a lot of data and figuring out what to do with it's one. The other one, though, is inherent to the industry. You may lose between 30 and 50% of your members per year. And at the beginning of the webinar, Blair, talked about some of the segments in his clubs, and I think that a lot of us tend to think about our trailing 12-month average attrition, or the attrition from last month, and I think that's a really helpful way to get your arms around your member retention. Another way that we also look at attrition, in addition to a 12-month average or a 30-day average, is we look at it over the course of a member's time since they joined. So the curves that you're seeing here, just to sort of orient you first off to the plot or the graph, it's the proportion of members that are still with a club after some period of time since they joined. So after 1 year, what proportion are still with the club? After 2 years, what proportion are still with the club? And so it's a way to look sort of across a member's life cycle and identify, are there points in a member's life cycle when attrition rises and falls, or when there may be a sharp drop off. What you see here, the fact that there are probably 8 or 10 different lines on the plot, those are unique segments of members. Blair also talked at the very beginning about how some of what we do is segmenting membership based off of different profiles, different characteristics, and I'll get into that in a minute. But that's what each of these lines are. They're a unique segment for a group of clubs, and each of those segments has a different rate at which they drop off, or they cancel their membership over the time that since they've joined. So just as an example, the pink line at the very bottom, what you can see there is half of those members who are in that particular group, in that particular segment, about half of them dropped after about 1.5 years of membership. So I wanted to introduce this way of looking at attrition because we're going to come back to it off and on throughout the presentation to just focus in on, are there any particular patterns that you might want to be aware of, and some ways in which you might want to be proactive about the members. So one other challenge is the fact that it does take a lot of cost to recruit a new member, and quite frankly, if you're recruiting and you're selling just to replace the ones who are leaving, then ultimately you're spending a lot of money and you're spending a lot of energy to just keep membership levels basically flat. And so the funnel on the left probably looks somewhat similar to what you experience. Some of the data is based off of our research, some of the benchmarking that Ursa has done. But when you look at the basic dynamics of the business, you could certainly end up spending somewhere between $75,000 or $100,000 per club on advertising just to replace the members who have lost. So finding a way to curb that attrition is good in that it creates a great experience for members, and then it also allows you to get more out of the sales and the recruiting activities that you're doing instead of just replacing the lost members.
And Keith, and also to really understand, like when I went through my segment, and when I saw that last segment with the everybody quits in that segment, it has me thinking, good Lord, am I spending money? What does this group look like? Where do they consume information? How did I acquire them? Why am I wasting my money acquiring them if they're not even there long enough to get past my return on investment on that customer acquisition cost that you have on the second to the bottom line there? So my customer acquisition cost is $86, not excluding labor. And so I've got to get that. I've got to have people that can stay past that $86 mark just to get my return.
So Blair, that's a great point, and getting members to stay past that point at which you sort of recoup your costs, and you're right, this is just showing the advertising, your labor spend is on top of that, is really important, and so that's why it's important to understand, are there some particular dynamics, month to month after somebody has joined, for different membership segments. And so what you're seeing here on this particular chart is it's a model of attrition, and it is not any one particular club. In fact, it's a model based off of somewhere over 1 million membership records, and it looks at what is the attrition per month for each month after a member has joined. So what's the attrition 1 month after someone's joined, 2 months after they've joined, 3 months, and so forth. And you can see that we highlighted 4 areas where it is typical to see attrition start to rise up, to sort of peak. And, we labeled them A, B, C, and D. It could be in that first group, somebody's a couple months into their membership, they're looking around and they're thinking, oh, this isn't working out the way I thought it would. Or I'm not building up, I'm not doing what I expected I would do when I first joined. And you can look at that second bar, the one labeled B, and it's right around the 12-month mark, which is probably a point where a lot of members say, well, I gave it a year, or for those who are in a contract that obligates them, this point at which that contract is up. And so, it's probably not too surprising for everyone who's really, kind of been in this business for a while to intuitively understand that there are those kinds of peaks and valleys in the first year. But it's also interesting to remember that those peaks and valleys can also show up 2-3 years out. And so you can see in some of the later marks where we have found very typically in a lot of clubs some peaks just past the 3-year mark and the 4-year mark where, quite frankly, it could be members saying, I'm not using it, I haven't used it for a while, I didn't want to quit right away because I really did want to make a commitment to my fitness, but I gave it another 12 months or I gave it, however much longer, and I'm still not using it. And so, this is important for a couple of reasons. One is when you look at your own data, if you find these kinds of peaks and valleys, then you can start to be proactive and get ahead of it. And if you find that there are certain groups where that first peak might be shifted a little to the left, well then quite frankly you might have a rise in attrition before you've even fully recouped your costs of acquiring that member, Blair, to your earlier point. And so, that would be a really important group to focus on, either A, no longer recruiting them in your advertising, or B, finding out why they're leaving and see if you can shift that to the right. So it's an important, we feel like this is an important way to look at just looking at your data so that you can understand where are there some natural tendencies for attrition to rise, and then what you can do with that is you can start to be proactive instead of reactive.
And Keith, if I remember right, like this pattern is fairly consistent across different types of clubs as well. As a matter of fact, I think this pattern was fairly consistent with our clubs, and we have all month-to-month memberships.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like I said, we've probably looked, maybe around 120 or so clubs. We see some version of this in almost every one. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I'm sure there is, there's probably one out there. Obviously, some clubs, those peaks shift a little to the left or a little to the right. Some might be a little steeper. And yeah, Blair, you're absolutely right. When we did the diagnostic on your club, you had some of these as well. And again, I think that there's just some human nature that drives some of this that is above and beyond the experience that you create, and part of it's, did they come to you with a workout habit? Were they able to develop one? And in fact we'll go through some of the details of some of what drives it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't think we've seen a club that didn't have some version of these peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
So what do you take from that? Again, I take a couple things away from it. One is depending on your margins and the cost for your actual member acquisition, we covered some general benchmarks. You can have, maybe it's a 6-month, 9-month, payback period, and yet you can see from that last chart that there are a lot of new members who are at a high risk of attrition in that same 6 or 9 month window. So finding ways to tackle that is not just good for making sure they have a great experience, but it's good for making sure that the business and the the economics of bringing in those new members, that you're getting that return. And if you can get those members to build the kind of workout habit and stay past the first year, what you may have also noticed in the curves is that once you get past the year, yeah, there were some blips out there at, I think in that case years 3 and 4, but attrition was a lot lower. So, what are the ways to not only keep them through the payback period, but to keep them through that 1 year point, which is really a key milestone in terms of then having members stay with you for long periods of time. And then finally, obviously, the other takeaway is once you've kept somebody past the 1 year, you've recouped your upfront acquisition costs. Keeping them is a lot more valuable than replacing him or her, because you are at a point where you've already paid back your upfront costs, and so it's a lot more of a profitable member. So, we feel like retention programs have really got to be targeted. You've got a lot of members. A lot of them are going to leave no matter what you do. And so, being targeted and focused is important. Otherwise, you're going to, potentially spend more than you save. So let me talk a little bit about how you can be focused and targeted. We feel like there's 3 components to that. Figuring out who's that right member, what's the right time to talk with him or her, and then what's the right message? What is it to engage them with? So, first off, we didn't come up with this whole cloth. There's a ton of companies, and you probably, in your own mind, can think of other companies that are using the same kind of techniques to figure out who's the right person, what's the right time, and the right message. Interestingly, it's both online and offline companies. We've had great success in this industry in taking a lot of the sort of offline data, that is the check-in data and the other stuff that about members, and then also integrating it with some of the online information that we can get. And so it just creates a nice, rich profile that allows you to create a great experience. We like to think of the retention issue as sort of 2 prongs. One is, what was the cost of acquiring that customer? Is it hard or easy for any particular group of members? And then what's the cost of retaining them? Again, is it really easy to retain them, or is it really hard? And just to kind of illustrate this 2x2 box or matrix, the bottom right corner where it's really easy to acquire them, but it's hard to keep them, those are your price shoppers. You do promotional pricing, they sign up, and then they're gone no matter what you do. They're looking for the next bargain and the next bargain. The ones who are perhaps harder to acquire, they may be harder to acquire because of not just a financial, they don't respond to discounting or other financial kind of measures, but they may be hard to acquire because they look for referrals from your other members, and they really look at the brand and the reputation that you've created. And so I just want to kind of share that thinking about your retention strategy from the perspective of your customer acquisition and your customer retention is not just a financial discussion, it's also a discussion around, is it hard to acquire or retain them when you've got branding and referrals and all those other dynamics as well. But fundamentally, it is important to remember you don't have to invest equally in all members, because you want to look at the ones who are generating a nice profit and creating a lot of other positive business impacts for your club.
And Keith, on this, I remember when we first segmented our data, and then we sat down with you, and you were taking us through the segments, and you said, well, there's one group in here that I'm really trying to understand, and they had a very high attrition rate, and they all joined in December of 2008.
2008.
January 2009, right? And you said, what do you know about that? And I said, oh yeah, I can explain that. We had expanded. We had one of our most successful promotions, quote unquote successful promotions ever. I forget, we had within 2 clubs, I think we had maybe more than 600 new members, and for us that was a huge deal, more than 600 new members in 2 clubs. It was the beginning that we just did not service them well, and we had a huge amount of attrition once spring hit, once May hit on that group, and then that really highlighted to me, as we're talking about easy to acquire, hard to retain, is oftentimes we do promotions, and we say, wow, that was a successful promotion, but you don't know, right? I mean, if I signed up 200 members tomorrow out of that segment D, well, that's a little bit frightening. You know, that's not necessarily a successful promotion if they're all extremely hard to keep.
Well, that's right. And I mean, look, you've got a sort of a finite capacity, if you will, or you know, your club is only so big. So if you do a promotion, you bring in a ton of new people, and this was the issue exactly as you had shared it with me in 2008. You know, you do a promotion and you bring in a ton of new members, but if they're all the ones that are hard to retain, they're gonna leave, you know, in the next season. For the time period in which they're there, they're creating a less pleasant environment for everybody else.
Great point.
You know, quite frankly, might stay with you for a very long time, be very profitable, and buy other ancillary services, whether it's training or supplements, et cetera. So, yeah, I mean, it's important to think about, A, you don't invest in everybody equally. B, once you've got a sense of some of the basic dynamics of your segments, using that to tailor promotions and other acquisition activities, and really just kind of think about the impact on all of the members, which, you know, certainly the issue that you were referring to there. So how do you know, how do you get ahead of which of the members who are at risk? And you know, I think that, you know, and quite frankly, we've done this webinar a couple of times, and that tends to be one of the first questions we get at the end is, well, how do I know which, you know, how do I know how to segment my data? How do I know which folks to pay attention to? And you know, I would say, obviously, starting with various usage statistics, number of check-ins or time since last check-in, is really powerful. And if nothing else, you know, that is a great starting point. If you may recall, though, Blair's segments that he shared at the very beginning, segment B used the facility twice as much as segment A, but you know, that segment A, that group A, had a much lower cancellation rate. So, you know, the key takeaway is that usage and time since last check-in are really important ways to begin to get your arms around the problem. But there are other dynamics that once you've done that, you probably want to also tackle. Things like, are there variations by price point? Are there variations by times in which you did a promotion? I mean, to Blair's example a minute ago, there was a huge, in that particular case, difference in the risk of members leaving based off of the group that came in with that promotion that he referenced, and then those that hadn't. I think that when you start to look across your membership base and you've gotten comfortable breaking them into groups based off of check-in, then, you know, breaking them into groups based on some other characteristics will open your eyes even more and give you even greater insight. How do you then know when to talk with them, when to engage them? It's our view, it is very much driven by that life cycle that I showed you at the beginning. So obviously there are seasonal ebbs and flows, and you know, when we do our analysis and our modeling, we'll correct or adjust or account for that. But what we have found is just a really powerful signal or indicator, if you will, is the time since they've joined. And again, that can be a case of members who are you know, perhaps struggling to build up the habit that they really wanted to have or wanted to develop. It could be members who've been there for a while and are getting a little bit of an itch to look around. You know, there's a lot of other ways to think about their life cycle, that is their time with you. But what's really important is to be ahead of the decision. For anyone who has you know, canceled their cable or canceled your cell phone service to switch to another, you get that phone call after you cancel with somebody trying to, quote, save you. And you know, look, we're all at that stage. We have sort of steeled ourselves that we're going to have an unpleasant conversation. We're just going to keep saying no, 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 in hopes that maybe after 3 times somebody will just, you know, say, okay, thanks, and hang up the phone. So if you can engage ahead of that, you're going to find a more receptive conversation. You're going to have a more receptive conversation, and the member's not going to have sort of prepared him or herself for just saying no, 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 in, you know, which is generally the case. You'll find you're trying to go in and save somebody who's just said they're going to cancel. So timing's important. Getting to them before they make that decision has created a lot stronger performance than after the urge has hit. The other part, though, is to have a real conversation with them. You know, it's not just a question of saying, you know, we haven't seen you in a while, where have you been? But instead to have an idea of what's behind their decision. And this is where having some of the insights that the Medallia product provides is really powerful. I mean, just really powerful. It's not just a question of, you know, are you likely to recommend or what's your likelihood to continue, but to go down into more detail around the experience with staff friendliness or the equipment or, you know, other elements of the plant. Are they getting the fitness results they expected? Is it an inspiring environment? Is it, you know, what's their view on PT? And I could go on, but that's really helpful. And quite frankly, that is helpful to understand not just the perspective of one individual, but we also have found that to be very useful to draw some inferences about similar groups of people who joined at the same time, people who work out at about the same level of activity, basically the same age. So if you haven't surveyed everybody, you can start to use the folks that you have surveyed to make some inferences about others. And then when you're engaging with them, you know, you're saying, look, I understand that the cleanliness and having towels, fresh towels available is really important. And I know we had some issues. We've tackled it. You know, we're on it, and we wanted you to know that the you know, the fact is we want you to be comfortable. We want you to feel like this is a club. This isn't just a facility, or, you know, whatever your branding and your messaging is. But to be proactive around some of the very specific issues that either they have stated through some of the surveys or that you think are probably relevant for them because they fall into a similar group. We've seen that have a really significant impact in making a connection with members and getting them to come back in if they haven't been in a while, or to engage a little bit more deeply if they haven't engaged quite as much. So I'd like to take just a few minutes, because I know we want to save some time for questions, to talk about some of the ways then that we've tackled some of these issues and put some of those techniques that I just discussed into practice. You know, first off, in a member's first year, again, we think of it very much from a member life cycle perspective. So, you know, when they have first joined, you've got some issues right away to be cognizant of. One of them is the fact that they may not have visited the facility in the first 60 days. So even if you have a great onboarding program, they may not have actually participated in it. They may not have gotten a health screen or complimentary personal training, or all the other things that I know a lot of you do to try to create a connection and to help them build up that habit. So you've got to tackle that issue. Depending on how many members you have and, you know, the rate at which you're onboarding new members, you know, you may use email to reach out to them. It may be phone calls. It may be a mix of that. And so there's always a challenge of folks not giving you their email or not giving you the correct one. And so getting around that, that's not trivial. And then finally, even when somebody does come into the club, you know, how do you know what he or she is doing? And that way, you know, you can have a meaningful conversation. So we break it up into sort of chunks of time across the bottom, and then we break up the strategies into members who have a low usage and a high usage. So if you start from left to right, obviously, you've got activities that go on before somebody signs a contract. And then, like I said, I suspect almost everybody's got a really world-class onboarding program. And so then what happens when onboarding is done? So we break it down to a series of buckets, if you will, of things to do just after onboarding when somebody is at a high level of usage compared to low usage. And then we continue to work through as the first year progresses. What's really important in terms of thinking about the first, say, 180 days after they've onboarded is to have different ways of reaching out to them, you know, different techniques, tools that your staff use, processes, et cetera, that you've trained your front desk and your other staff to use, to learn about the member. I mean, that's really for the first phase. The important piece is learning about them, and then as you move into the second half of their first year and beyond, you want to learn from them. You want them to be your eyes and ears, telling you what they like, what they don't like, so that you're constantly improving and looking for ways to continuously improve. So we think that's really important. In the first stage, you want to learn about them, and then in the second stage, you want to learn from them. When you're learning about them, and these slides, we'll send these out, so I won't walk through all the specific bullet points, but you've got a different strategy to learn about members when they are not coming in frequently versus when they're coming in frequently. You want to try to elicit action from them if they're not coming in quite a bit, and there's a lot of ways that we've seen our clients take to do that. Some have sent out emails, some have sent out just newsletters with nutritional information, some have let them know about events in the community, outdoor activities, just all kinds of things to see what does somebody respond to and how do they respond. And then for those who are using your club and coming in quite a bit, you want to be, and there's probably 100 different ways to do this, but you want to be aware of what they're doing when they come in, because that's a great way to then be very connected and focused in conversations you have with them later. So finding ways to note whether are they going to cardio, group X, et cetera, so that you can create and maintain a strong relationship and create a nice foundation there. After say it's 150 or 180 days, the focus really shifts to learning from them. For those who are still at this stage minimally engaged, there's probably a much lighter touch, in part because if they haven't built a habit and they're not coming in, generally they're going to go one of two paths. They're going to keep the membership for a while in hopes that they do come back, in which case, that's good. You may see them come in, you may continue to have a chance to work with them, or they may just, it may not be the right time for them, and they may not have built up the habits that they wanted. And at that stage, there may be a lot of members that fall into this category, and if you were trying to have a conversation with each of them, or you're trying to reach out with some retention strategy to each of them, your chances of success are probably, well, statistically they're lower than with some other groups, and it can just suck up all of your time and energy. So, a light touch for those who are still minimally engaged in the second half of the first year, but those who are much more engaged, that's a chance when you can really double down on figuring out how do you deliver the products and services to them in a way that makes them appreciate the value of what you provide. I mean, at the end of the day, for any business who is collecting a monthly fee, whether it's your cable company or your health club, the member on the receiving end, the consumer, is making a judgment that says, are the services that I receive, the value of them, is it at or greater than the dollar amount that I pay? And so, that sort of simplifies it, but it's something like that. And so if you can strengthen that relationship, so anytime they do stop to think about that, whether they explicitly think about it or not, the answer is very clear. Yeah, the value is much higher than the fees that I pay. I'll give you a quick example. Telcos, the phone companies, are great at this, and this is when I signed up for a new phone maybe a year or 2 years ago, and immediately got a series of texts, a series of emails, some phone calls, all with different things. Some were surveying me about my experience, some were welcoming me, some were trying to see if I was interested in other options, packages and so forth that I could add on to my current phone. And what they were essentially doing is they were testing to see, do I respond to phone calls or to email or to texts? Do I respond more to survey questions or to sales promotions? And this is probably a little bit more systematic than most of us need to do, but it's a good framework to keep in mind, which is you onboard somebody and you're in that first year. Find different ways to reach out to them, both different messaging and then different techniques for doing it, and see what works, and then learn from that so that going forward. The thing that I think is important when you're talking with your members and you're thinking about how do I want to retain them, is members do define value differently. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that, you know, generally in any subscription business and any business in which somebody's paying a monthly fee, there's a sense of, you know, what's the value that I'm getting from this subscription or from this membership, and people define that differently. What we have seen, and again, this is a case where getting the kind of insight that that Medallia and the MXM product provides is really important. Is we've seen that members define value differently based off of different price points and really different value propositions that a club offers. So, you know, if you're a club where you're primarily offering access, you're offering access to a facility and to equipment and to trained staff, your members are most likely, that's what they're shopping for, that's what they're looking for. And so to them, what's really important is having a clean facility and good available equipment and, you know, a good experience. If you are at a more of a premium price point and you're not just offering access, but you're offering results, you're offering a lifestyle, you are offering something that is more experiential, then it's almost table stakes. It is assumed that the cleanliness is there and the equipment condition is there. And then what, you know, really starts to differentiate the members' view of value, and what we see to then be strong predictors of attrition, are the things that are more oriented around the results that they're achieving and the value and the experience, and is it an inspiring environment. So it is important when you think about having a conversation with your members, when you think about trying to design ways to retain them, to think about what is the way that I think my members define value, the value that I provide. And look, obviously, all of us would love to do everything for all of our members, but you know, there's finite resources, whether that's time or dollars and so forth. And so, you know, there really is, if you're providing access, make sure you're doing it well. And you know, if you're using MXM as a way of collecting information, then pay really close attention to things that are indicators around the facility and the plant and so forth. And if you're at a higher price point where what you're advertising and your value proposition is more of an experience, then again, pay really close attention to some of those other differentiators that are more around the results and the environment and the value that the member has believes he or she receives. So, you know, what we do, and Blair mentioned at the very beginning that we, for his club and for a lot of our clients, will segment their members. So I talked a lot about some of the different indicators that we have found, whether that is indicators based on the length of time they've been with you, indicators based off of the level of usage, indicators based off of some of the Medallia scores or other scoring that you might get from a surveying system. What we also do beyond those kind of broad indicators is we will run a series of computer models that will find patterns in the members and then cluster them together and identify and weight the factors that had the most significance in creating a cluster. And so this chart right here shows just a simple graphic for one of the studies that we did for one of our clients, the relative weight of some of their the factors that drive their retention. And you know, this is a case where, to my point earlier, this is a club, this is an ownership group that is largely offering access. And so you can see some of the most important things to predict retention, some of the most important things driving retention are the cleanliness and the facility and the equipment and you know, the locker room. And so this allows, when you get to this level of segmenting the data or analyzing the data, it allows you to not just identify which members are at risk, fairly precisely, but also what are the key drivers, so that if you are making an investment, next year you want to turn over a couple of your contracts with the janitorial staff or with some other aspect of your operations. It can give you a sense of what are the things to focus on, because they are the truly key touch points for members' retention.
Keith, on this one too, one of the things that really stood out to me on that is the problems with the counter billing as being the fourth one on here, because it's Yelp scores are driving buying decisions, right? The rating scores are driving buying decisions. One of the things we do, because we do also scrape social media and look at ratings on social media and everything for customers, is that if let's say somebody's dissatisfied with the cleanliness, or that does not trigger the negative Yelp review like a money issue. And the money issue, oftentimes these things are the ones that surface, out there on Yelp, where then they also say, and by the way, it's not clean and the people are rude, but it's so frequently somebody messed with my frickin' money in a way that I didn't like, or I wasn't aware of. That's how people perceive that. That one can really, not just internally, but that one surfaces out on the skin somewhere where everybody can see it. Those are really caution people when they start getting, in their experiential data that, people are really reporting a lot of those problems. That's a real warning sign for social media.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, and sort of an unpaid promotion. Blair, I know you and perhaps there are others online who think of members when they're leaving as alumni, or people who
Right.
You want to make it easy for them to leave because they may come back, and you want to invite them to come back.
Right.
And so we, with those kinds of programs, we see that the scores around the accounting and the billing problems tend to be much more favorable. There's less pain points around that, and so while that may not be the right model for every club to think of members who are leaving as alumni, having something that doesn't sort of drag them, up and down the street and make it
Right.
excruciatingly painful we've seen has a very positive impact on those particular scores. In some cases, those are scores those are indicators of then the likelihood to stay.
Excellent.
Well, so let's see. To wrap it up, I mean, I think there's just a couple things that we've found to be really important. First and foremost, if you look back at your business and find that you're recruiting just to replace lost members, that's expensive, and it is. You're running in place. But the flip side is you can't retain everybody, and if you try to, you're gonna overwork yourself. And so looking for the different reasons, and we find a life cycle view and some of the club characteristics and factors to be very helpful, but looking for the different ways in which you can focus on the members and retaining them so that it's targeted, it's focused, can be a really important tool. Thinking about it from the perspective of who is that right member and what's the right time and the right message is proven to be successful. And then, like I said at the very beginning, you've got information that a lot of other companies would love to have on your customers. And so, I would invite you to find ways to use it. And so with that, I know we've got a few minutes left. I'm not sure how many or if any questions have come in, but let me stop talking so that maybe Blair and I can tackle any questions that have come in.
Excellent.
Yes. We
Go
do
ahead,
have a
Rachel.
couple questions. First question, how do you get your data segmented?
Keith, I'll let you. I mean, we personally worked with Keith's company to do that, and he had API access to our member management system and to Medallia, and he was able to just go back and pull. I think we pulled 3 years worth of data and over 4,000 members when he segmented that data. Now, from a I can speak to it in like a gym owner, right? I won't be able to speak to it like a data scientist. If in other words, what does the modeling look like? But it was pretty easy for us to do that with Keith. But there's other ways that you can manually do it. Keith, maybe go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So let's see. How do you do it? We found, like Blair said, we take two approaches. One of which is we've got a software system that connects with most of the member management systems, with the Medallia system with some third-party providers of socioeconomic and demographic data, and we kind of let the computers run against that and use a machine learning algorithm, kind of the same way Amazon and some of the other software companies will try to identify, you bought this, you're potentially interested in buying that. Similar kind of clustering and so that creates a very detailed group of segments, which we use to assign a risk score. The other thing that we do is we go back through a couple of years worth of data and look based off of the key factors that our models told us were important, and we look across those factors to see we sit down with the management team, the owners, the operators, and identify, where there's some one-offs, like the case that Blair mentioned where there was a promotion, and okay, that's good to know, but we look across some of the basic indicators that we've always seen to be relevant: life cycle, time since check-in, a lot of the different Medallia scoring, age, gender, and what's important is, you can look at them kind of one by one, and if you're not doing anything, that's how I would start. I go one by one, and then we'll look at them in combinations of 5 or 6 together, and we have found that that's a really pretty straightforward way to create some segments of members, and then to treat them in a very unique way that's tailored to what drives them, what drives their behavior, and our clients have gotten great response from that.
And I'll add one thing to that too. When you segment your data like that, so for us, because we have such great information, who the people are, their phone number, their addresses, their emails, and it allows you to say, let's look at this whole group, segment A. Let's find some people that are most closest to the median here of age, and let's put together a focus group, and let's really dig in and talk to them and understand. I mean, you get to go talk to them, right? You also know all these other people that canceled, and you can actually go contact them and see, when did you, what was the special that you bought on, or I mean, it's just so you have the information, and now you get to go out and interview, and it really helps you to understand how you should market and what you should do for retention. Okay.
And I think that begs the question of, so you do great analysis of the data. What do you actually do with it? And Blair, I think you guys have really done just an amazing job in terms of, we'll produce lists based off of different criteria that are important to an owner or general manager, and we'll score them. But then we've seen clients do just great things with it. Some will fold it right into an email campaign, and others will fold it into some new programming that they're going to roll out, and so they'll invite some members in who we identified were at risk but were really high value, and invite them in for a conversation, a roundtable, whatever you might want to call it, so they feel like they're contributing. But what you're really doing is you're also building a closer relationship with them. That is, you're building the relationship, strengthening the relationship they have with your club. And then we've got some clients who take it and actually flip it on its head. They say, okay, I understand who are my groups and segments that are at risk. I want the ones that are not at risk, that are with me forever and are just great members to have, because I want to now focus my recruiting on more of them. And shameless promotion, that's the topic for the next webinar, which is up on the screen on, I guess, mid-September, the 17th, is how do you also take this to not just think about retention, but think about how do I grow revenue, how do I
Right.
how do I recruit, how do I cross-sell. So folks do great stuff with all of the different kinds of insights and lists that this kind of analysis will produce.
Excellent.
All right. And another question, or what are some of the ways clubs operationalize the data?
I'll jump on that. One of the ways that we do it is we're automated, where we get a list every Friday from Two River, and it has a list of names of people with their experiential scores and when they joined and what segment they're in, so we can immediately look at it and know. And so one of the things it's looking at is time since joined. What are the characteristics? Which of our key segments are they in? So how at risk are they? So our most at risk members are just pushed out to us on Fridays, and then our team just calls them, and we keep a running record of everybody that we called, and but it gives us a chance to get some insight and be, and, you know, it's that proactive part. This has us thinking about retention in sort of two different strategies. What we talk about is our operational strategy, and our operational strategy is that overall customer experience management and how we make sure that we train staff friendliness, how we hire, train, onboard our own staff so that we're, you know, our gym cleanliness scores, our equipment condition score, all of that. It's sort of the operational, do we have the right programming? It's everything that you guys do, right? It's, are you operating really well? And how do we constantly get better and better at operating? That's the sort of the operational strategy for retention. And now we're also looking at sort of what is the SWAT team strategy. Now that we can see these segments and we get these early indicators, what is the more specific things like Keith has been talking about in here? Well, we're going to go in now and we're going to focus more on just individuals within segments and see if we can affect that. So this has us now thinking in two different, how we, you know, what the tactics are in those two different strategies.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Where do you get the customer experience data?
So there's a lot of ways to do that, but you should, you know, of course we use MXM, but you should have an operational, it's not an annual survey, it's not a quarterly survey, it's not an ad hoc survey. Your customer experience management, whether it's MXM or somebody else, should be operational, meaning that that data trickles in constantly every day. You have an opportunity to close the loop with customers in real time, right at location level. And so when we talk about operational customer experience management, that's what we mean. And then, you know, the people responsible for the customer experience are the first ones to have their hands on it and do something with that information. And then as that aggregates, it starts to build this very rich reporting and view of what your overall customer experience is. And then it exposes, you know, what are the gaps between the promise that we're trying to make and the promise that's being kept in operations. So.
All right, well, we've reached our time limit. Blair, Keith, thank you so much for presenting, and thanks to everyone who attended as well. Do you have any closing remarks?
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks so much.